Right. So when Dallas said, I want you to talk about 3 insects that always, I fall back to Alice in Wonderland. So we got wheat midge, sawfly, and grasshoppers. So my, if you remember that. Yeah, we hit grasshoppers at the end. So I put those in order. That's my intro slide. If you don't know me or know how to get a hold of me, it's right there. I'm on Twitter, and that's my email address. So it's not at canada.ca anymore. They changed that up. And
Why did they do that?
they just change it up every 3 years to keep everyone on their toes. That was actually my old email address from 5 years ago. So we just come full circle. So I've got the Midge Busters logo on there. Anybody here heard about Midge Busters before? Put your hand up.
I have, because I've heard you speak before.
Oh, sweet. Where was that?
That was just before COVID up at the station up by North Valley.
Oh, cool. I don't remember being there. Thank you for remembering.
Before COVID.
Yeah, before COVID. I don't remember much before or during, actually. So hopefully you guys haven't run into the wheat midge too much, but I'm gonna give you as much information as possible. What I've got in here is not general stuff, very specific to these insects, but not heavy with graphs or anything, because I know we just had lunch. I don't want to put you to sleep. So the problem here, orange wheat blossom midge. Why do they call it orange? Because the adults are orange, the larvae are orange. That's a female. She's also orange. And Ian Weiss and Marge Smith, they did quite a bit of work at the Winnipeg Research Center on wheat midge back when it was a huge problem in the late 90s. And they called it the most serious insect pest of spring wheat. So the presentation is going to be front end loaded towards wheat midge. When I started in 2016, my research manager basically just said, okay, solve wheat midge. And that was my mandate. So here I am trying to solve wheat midge. Why? Because the kernels look like this. So you can see a couple of third instar larvae hanging out on the kernels still. This is unusual because usually we get rains in August and they're not still hanging out there. But I have talked to wheat breeders who they're bringing in their wheat and they've just got little orange larvae all over the place. So this is what the second instars look like right here. So by this point in time, they're still feeding and they're still causing damage to the kernels. This is what you want your wheat to look like, just beautiful like that. So that's an old picture. This one here is a new picture. So when they said solve wheat midge, I started taking pictures of wheat midge with my really cool microscope camera, stacking things up. So way back when Owen Olfert was looking at this, there was probably 6 or 7 researchers right in Saskatchewan looking at wheat midge. And they figured out that we had losses of about $50 million in Manitoba, $130 million in Saskatchewan back in those late 90s, where wheat midge really was in outbreak. And then Bob Lamb was a researcher at the AFC Winnipeg Center. And every time I look at his work, I kind of go, I think I'm kind of Bob Lamb because I have the exact same interests and I'm doing follow-up work on things that he's done. So Owen Olfert, in his paper in 1985, even worked out the damage relationship. So about 30% of your kernels infested is a decrease of about 40% in yield. So those initial kernels I showed you there, those really damaged ones, they just blow out the back of the combine. You might not even know that you had a wheat midge problem because those seeds are gone. So I call it almost a phantom yield that you don't really see. So they've worked out the economic threshold. So what I would do first is, do I have any wheat midge in my field? Take a sweep net. All these little orange bodies there, those are all wheat midge. But fortunately, we see a lot of anthers as well. So wheat is naturally resistant to wheat midge as it ages. So the levels of ferulic acid just naturally increase in the kernels. And wheat midge hate the taste of ferulic acid. So they try to get there early. So at this point in time, these wheat midge might not have been doing too much damage unless we're just looking at anthers from those primary tillers. Because of course you get some nice rains and maybe your density is not great, things are tillering out, and then the wheat midge can hammer your tillers as well. So unfortunately, when you are scouting, you actually need to be in the field. So we don't have any good pheromone traps, or Manitoba uses yellow sticky traps. I'll talk about those in a second. But you need to be in your field and you're looking at your wheat and you're looking at 5 heads. And if you see one female wheat midge on those 5 heads, you're at your yield threshold. So that's a 15% yield loss right there if you don't take action, or if you're not standing in a field of midge tolerant wheat. So then your grade, so wheat midge will damage seeds. Sometimes they're hugely damaged and they blow at the back of the combine. If you just have one larva on there, your grain will be damaged and it won't blow out the back. And we call those damaged harvestable. And they go in and they will decrease your grade if you take enough of those damaged seeds to the elevator. So we're looking at 1 adult midge on 10 wheat heads to maintain that grade. So sometimes it says 1 on 4 or 5 heads, or 1 on 9 to 10 heads. And I can't remember stuff like that. So just 5 and 10, 5 and 10. So that should be hopefully easy enough for everyone to remember. So would you hop on the sprayer if you had, say, AC branding in your field and you saw this? Yeah, we've got 2 there. There's a bunch over there. So I use this one from Owen because I haven't seen densities like this in any field that I've been at. Because taking this picture was probably done in a growth cabinet. So, but if you had this out in the field, we did have a grower just this last year who talked about densities like this, and he was in an area that was forecasted to be green on the provincial map. So he was actually happy to have the pheromone traps in his field because it let him know to go out and start scouting for wheat midge. So in my own fields, what I found was that it's at about 8:30 at night when the wind calms down and it's sort of that nicely humid time and the sun has dipped just on the horizon, like it wants to go down, but it hasn't quite. That's when the wheat midge start coming out. So just sort of rise up out of the canopy, and then you'll start to see things like that. So those are when the adults hit. They overwinter as these little cocoons here, and they're actually a 3rd instar larva. So those ones that I showed you sitting on the seeds, when you get that bit of rain, they drop to the ground and they spin this little cocoon, and that's how they overwinter. And then the spring rains, Bob Elliott at Saskatchewan Research Center worked out that it was an accumulated 25 millimeters of rain throughout May that kickstarted the development of these cocoons. And then somebody else, they had cocoons just sitting in the soil for like 13 straight years, and they reactivated after 13 years. Maybe they could have gone longer if they had left them. So this is a really dormant phase, and that's like the ticking time bomb in your field. If you've got the perfect conditions, out they'll come, but if you don't have the perfect conditions, they'll just stay buried until next year in their cocoon. So when you do get these rains, they shed this cocoon layer and you get that 3rd instar larva, it becomes mobile again. And because they're tiny, weak little flies, they crawl up to near the surface where they pupate. So this is what the pupa looks like. They actually have devil horns, which really drives home the point that this is the worst pest of wheat that we have here. So that's what the pupa looks like. Fortunately, we just have 1 generation that comes out, so they're not going to keep going and keep going. But what I have been finding is that we can have 2 peaks of emergence. And so your later tillers or your later planted wheat might not even be escaping the wheat midge scourge. So the pupae then start coming out of the ground right after the long weekend in July, or right on the long weekend in July. So you get males that come out a day or 2 before the females, and then they hang around and they wait for the females. But that's when we catch them on the pheromone traps. So we start to see that male emergence. So then we can time when to go looking for the females in the field. Because of course it's the females that are doing the damage. See these little dots here? Females are laying eggs on heads. Males, they don't lay eggs. So we can track the population of males, but it doesn't really correlate very well to the population of females, unfortunately. So then this is what the males look like. They've got really long antennae with all these little cincillae or hairs coming off of them. And so it looks very different from the female antennae. So anytime a male antenna looks different from a female antenna, you can be sure that it's got something to do with mating and finding females. So there's a female there. Her antennae are much shorter, and she doesn't have a lot of those bristly cincillae because she doesn't need to smell pheromone. There's not that biological imperative to find her way there. But this is her ovipositor right there, so that's what she uses to lay eggs. And this is what she does during the daytime. She just hangs out in the lower canopy, And so you won't see her up on the hedge until about that 8:30 at night period. Here are some eggs that are just about to become first instar larvae. You can actually see the beady little red eyes there. If Hollywood's taught us anything with red eyes is evil. So, obviously, we have an evil insect here. So they don't stay in the egg stage for too long. We got like 4 to 7 days maybe. And often they're laid in clutches of 4 like this. So mama wheat midge comes in, she puts about 4 there. 4 is going to trash that seed, so that kernel is going to be toast. And she lays it on top of the gloom or just underneath on the side of the gloom. This over here is just Sharpie because we had to mark where these were so I could take a picture with my camera. This is not my picture, I borrowed this one, but these are first instar larvae. They're very small and mobile, and they are working their way down onto the kernel. And this is the stage where SM1 acts to kill them. So they are a gall-forming midge, which means the larva taps into the seed and starts to inject some stuff and then sucks stuff out. And it's at this point that SM1 works to increase that ferulic acid that they don't like the taste of. So severe infestations, you can actually get more than 3 or 4 per floret, and you don't want them all over your heads because that, if you're thinking of a head that has 31, let's say you lose 3 or 4 of those kernels, that's actually a really big yield loss if you have that on a lot of heads in your field. So I took a picture of all 3 larval instars together just to show you the difference in size. Here's first instars right there. This is a second. I didn't realize how fast they were. I couldn't get a picture because they kept running away. And then this is a third instar. They are not fast. They're actually quiescent. They don't feed. They just sit there. And weirdly enough, they don't shed their second larval skin. They just hang out inside of it for a little while. So they wait until those August rainstorms right here, and then they shed that skin. So here's one coming out of the skin, and then they drop down to the ground. And so you can see there's water on the surface here, and those are the larvae. And I've actually got a video to show you. That'd be pretty cool. So these are the third instar larvae burying themselves in the ground. And it's not recorded because we moved it off. Anyway, what would happen is they just squiggle down into the ground, but we sped it up, but it happens really fast. And so this is part of the problem with studying wheat midge is if I want to count larvae and heads, I have to get there before the rains do. So one of the ways that I've tried to get around the real problem of, getting to every wheat field in Western Canada is to collaborate with CCAN. And we developed this project called the Midge Busters. So it's hashtag because it's on Twitter. So that's social media. So if you search up hashtag Midge Busters right now, you should find all of our old tweets on Twitter. So my goals and CCAN's goals, they're sort of the same. Mine was more data heavy. CCAN's was, we should really know what's going on in people's fields. And I said, that's great. So I'm trying to match our provincial forecast maps to what's actually happening in the field. So that field is green, my field is green. Is that actually what's happening? That is the question I was trying to answer there. But then Ag Canada also does emergence predictions. So we predict based on soil temperature and rainfall when the wheat midge emergence is going to happen. So, well, it's the perfect way for us to actually ground truth those emergence maps. And if you're an agronomist or a grower in your field, it gives you a tool, the pheromone trap, to actually say, ooh, I actually have wheat midge coming out at this date, so I should start looking in my field for females. It's also a good way to get in touch with me. We shared information on WhatsApp and put out the Midge Busters on Twitter. So if you're like, I don't really want to participate in Midge Busters, but you punch this in on Twitter, at about early July, you'll start seeing pictures of wheat midge on traps. You can get an idea of where they are and what's going on. So here's that soil coring. The province of Saskatchewan and Sask Crop Insurance, Sask Wheat are all funding a lot of these surveys. And one of the surveys is this forecasting for wheat midge. So these guys are not on the survey. This is part of a different project. These are a couple of my summer students. And they were taking soil cores. So cores in the bag, you take it back and you wash out all the soil and you wash those third instar larvae out. And some of the early researchers have done the math to say, with 17 soil cores in this whole field, we can scale it up to what we think damaging midge levels might be. And so it's about 600 per meter squared. It seems like a lot, but you'll see on some of these maps that often we don't actually get that. So here's that 600 mark where it turns from green into a different kind of yellowy color. Here's a yellowy color here. So this was the forecast of 2020. I'm using the Alberta map because they put each individual soil core location on their map. So Shelley Barkley goes to about 300 fields, and our provincial surveyor goes to around 300 fields in Saskatchewan as well. And this is all driven by people being allowed in the field. So if you want your field surveyed, they'd be happy to come survey it. You just have to give permission in advance with your coordinates for them to come out there. So I wanted to see, are these forecasts being realized, yes or no? Here's that AAFC emergence model. So this was for June the 26th and using a degree day base. So insects develop on what are called degree days. So if it's really hot, you can get a bunch of degree days in just one day. If it's really cold, you get not very many degree days. So using the degree days plus the rain helps us predict when the wheat midge are coming out. And so these will be put out from Megan Bankowski's lab. You'll see them on the provincial ministry website, but you'll also see them on the Prairie Pest Monitoring Network. Who here hasn't heard of Prairie Pest Monitoring Network? Okay, everybody's heard of it. That's good, which means you're on the email list and you should be getting these right around June 26th. So this is a pheromone trap. You see all these little wheat midge here? These are all male wheat midge. So this is how we predict the emergence. So this red lure here smells like a female wheat midge. Did some cool work back in the 90s. And these males here all thought they were coming in for a really good time and just wound up splatted like this. So you remember me showing you the tiny antennae on the female? Super long antennae on the male there. And yeah, it was actually a Canadian lab out in Simon Fraser University that figured out what the sex pheromone release was and duplicated it. And now we can buy these commercial lures and track wheat midge in the field. So we used a Google Sheet, which had some problems, but worked out okay. So I shared the Google Sheet with people and they could enter in their own trap data, and then we could pull that data out and take a look at it. So it was online and real-time data collection. We used WhatsApp then to share the pictures and to say, hey, what's coming out in your field? Should I be out looking? I would say, okay, it's time to put up your yellow sticky cards. And I'm not sure if anybody did or not. I'd say, hey, it's time to go scout for the females in your field. And I'm not sure this year if anybody did that either. So if you're in the room and you want to participate in Midge Busters, it'd be awesome if you do everything I ask you to do. Thanks. And so we would collect the trap count data every 3 days because those adult wheat midge have about a 5-day lifespan. So this would give us the idea of when populations were actually coming out. And then take the crop staging too at each count date. So, you know, if your crop staging is 70 and your wheat midge population is just coming out, you don't have to worry because it's past the time when wheat midge can hurt your field. And I wanted to find out if there was a change in refuge too after testing. So are you losing that 10% refuge? And maybe we can correlate that to wheat midge pressure in your field. So going back to that 3-day window, this was 3 days later in this field in Elstow. So big population emergence here. And then the emergence started to drop off a bit right there. So in between these 2 dates is when the females would be coming out. So we would say, okay, you should be out looking for females right there after that initial big emergence. So people put up pictures on Twitter and they can ask me questions like, do I have 3 wheat midges here? I'm gonna ask you guys, do I have 3 wheat midges here? No, you got 2 wheat midges, that's right. This one's way too yellow. So I can answer questions like that. And I can give unsolicited advice like, hey, you should move your lure over to the center. It's gonna be a whole lot better for everybody. And this is Mira, she works for CCAN and she's really good at happily showing off her traps. Another thing that I'm now doing with those, and I think I didn't put the slide in, is I'm taking all the pictures, so people will send me these pictures here, and we're actually getting artificial intelligence, so getting a computer to start counting the wheat midge. So the computer would look at this and say, oh, that's a wheat midge. Oh, that's a wheat midge. That one's not a wheat midge. So that when we have LSTO pictures like this, it doesn't take somebody a whole hour to sit down and count. Computer looks at it and goes, boom, we've got, you know, probably that's about 1,000 wheat midge, I would say, on the trap. So Secan Laura and Secan Todd, these are the driving forces behind midge busters. It was Secan Todd, he said, hey, well, why don't we pay for some of these pheromone traps and we'll get them out to our Secan producers. So I use this picture because here's Secan Laura. This was taken on Canada Day, obviously. And that's when the wheat midge come out. So you want to be at the lake watching fireworks, and wheat midge want to be coming up laying eggs on your field. So this is almost daily pheromone trap counts from my, I call it my wheat midge nursery. And so here's nothing on the 16th of June. Here's the 19th of June. We have a couple starting to come out. 21st of June, 6. 24th of June, 27. We had a little bit coming out there. 25th, almost nothing. And then here we go. 28th of June, right before the weekend, wheat midge population. So the males are coming out here. So that means the females are going to be coming out this time right here, which means I am probably trying to scout my field right around here for females while everybody else is watching fireworks. So I tried to do what Manitoba does. So Bob Lamb, he worked out, you put out 10 of these yellow sticky cards in a field when the females are out. And if you catch 3 over a 3-night period, you are at your economic threshold. So I tried that. I put out 10 over a 3-day period. I caught 0. This number though, is actually almost 3,000 wheat midge parasitoids that I inadvertently put to death by putting out these yellow sticky cards. So I said, whoa, what a great way to survey the parasitoid population in people's fields. So that's why I pushed them out with midge busters now, so we could tell which parasitoids and what density they're coming out at. So this is an interesting peak right there. This is going to hit those primary tillers, because the wheat midge is going to be coming out of the ground in sync with those primary tillers, which are coming out of the ground based on those initial rains that you've got in the springtime. What I didn't anticipate were these little bumps of wheat midge, especially this one here, the 22nd of July, when the crop is tillering. So I've been seeing this quite a bit, that we've got kind of 2 peaks of wheat midge emergence happening, which you wouldn't really get to tell if you just quit surveying right here. So because we keep on going, we can tell that there's some weird stuff going on in the field. So this was in 2021. This just gives you an idea of the Zadok scale. So right here is your danger point. We use those same danger colors of a stoplight to say, here's the danger point for your crop. So if you look on these fields here, we're all at that danger zone on the 9th of July. These ones here were a little bit late. So they hadn't actually reached the Zadok scale of about 56. So that is boot stage. So as soon as that boot splits and you can see the head, so can the female wheat midge, and she can lay eggs on your plant. So this was the forecast that prompted my talk to Secan, where we started the whole midge busters thing. We called this the potential perfect storm. So we hadn't seen these big patches of red before. So this is from the soil coring, and this was the forecast for 2021. And I said, well, this is perfect to see whether this is actually realized or not with the pheromone traps. So we did get pheromone traps into quite a few of these areas. But as you'll see, each black dot is a pheromone trap. So we still have a lot of uncovered territory, especially in Saskatchewan and even over here. But I've got a few more traps to add to these from the provincial repository. But we do have some red spots starting to happen there. And so I put the maps side by side here. This would have been July the 17th, so emergence would have been pretty much finished. So this is cumulative. So over the whole trapping, we had 634 per site is what that was. So that perfect storm was almost realized, except we do have some green areas here, and then this big red area down here, of course, heavily weighted by that point, and then these points over here in Manitoba. But when we stack it up together, we had some predicted wheat midge up here that just did not happen up in this Melfort, Tisdale, Carrot River area. And so when I looked at the Environment Canada data, Melfort did get 31.4 millimeters over the course of May, like Bob Elliott's paper said it should to get wheat midge emergence going, but the wheat midge really didn't come out in great numbers up there at all. And when I looked at it, it was just little, almost like, you know, hardly any rain, 2 millimeters here, 3 millimeters there. It didn't add up to that big soaking rain, so it probably did not soak down to where the wheat midge was sitting in the ground. But then down here, the Regina area was predicted to have, you know, decent wheat midge pressure. And oh, it was just red over in this area. And they had a big rain for about 4 days at the exact perfect time, 21st to the 25th. They got 65 millimeters of rain, and that just brought them up and out of the ground. So still got to look at these other areas here yet, but I'm imagining we're going to see about the same thing because it's these rainy storms that get things going. If you remember 2019, pretty dry in the spring. I actually had to irrigate my wheat midge on the 27th of May, and that caused this first spike. So the big mountain here, this is my wheat midge nursery. These other ones weren't irrigated, and so their populations are small. So the midge would have just stayed in the ground on these ones. So we actually have that same peak again that we saw in my 2021 data there. So that second peak of wheat midge was actually higher than the first one. And what caused this second peak was probably this rain on the 17th of June that got them up and out of the ground. So there's still a lot for me to figure out about wheat midge and what's going on. I mentioned the parasitoid. So this little wasp comes along and she lays her egg into the egg of the wheat midge or the first instar larva. And so she's really well synchronized with the wheat midge population. She'll come out, she gives the female wheat midge enough time to mate and lay eggs, and then she comes up and out of the ground, and then she can go find those eggs and first instar larvae. And she'll take out 30 to 40% of next year's wheat midge population because her offspring sits inside the egg or inside the wheat midge larva like a bomb waiting to go off. And it goes off in that third instar larva the following year. So instead of the pupa turning into a wheat midge adult and having a little orange fly come out, it turns into this cute little black wasp. And she flies out and tries to keep her population going.
So what time of day would you see her out? So if you
These
saw
guys are
her-
die early. You'll see them during the daytime.
So if you see them out, then you should get your red flag going.
You shouldn't. No, you shouldn't. Your red flag should have been about 3 days before these little ladies came out. Because you don't want to get on your sprayer and blast these ones because it's too late. You've already got eggs, you've already got larvae, and the product that is registered now really sucks on the eggs and larvae. The product that got deregistered was better on those, apparently. So that 10% SM1 wheat to non-SM1 wheat also helps keep these populations. So survives in the refuge there. Yeah, so this is kind of an answer to Sherry's question there. Spraying a wheat midge population late winds up killing the parasitoids. Or if you put out 10 yellow sticky cards in the field, you also kill the parasitoids. So this is Saskatchewan's data from the soil coring. They also, it's been described to me like this. We take pins and we pop those larvae, and if they pop, then they're infested with the parasitoid. So 2018, we had 21% parasitism. It was a pretty low year for wheat midge. 2019, the population was coming back up. We had 24% parasitism in Saskatchewan, and then 24% again in 2020. And I made this graph back in 2021, so I didn't have the 2021 data yet. So I'll probably just keep adding on as we're going. But what was unfortunate was Alberta and North Dakota were reporting only 8% levels of parasitism. So their parasitism had dropped, and this might be a drop too from the 30 to 40% that was talked about before. So this is in At Field Heroes. Do you guys know Western Grain Research? They put out the At Field Heroes program. So there's information about this parasitoid. If you look at Field Heroes on Twitter, you should probably follow it right now. And here's those yellow sticky cards I was talking about. So put them out after that peak of male emergence had happened, and didn't catch any female wheat midge, but you can see what the adult wasps look like there. So Here's that 2021 count again, just to get you back to the pheromone traps where we had almost nothing up here. Lots of populations there. And then this was what the forecast looked like for 2022. And I said, well, we had wheat midge. They were coming out. Like, what happened? They just, for whatever reason, didn't get to the ground in a place that got picked up by the surveys. So maybe the populations, like this is adults, maybe they kind of failed to actually get through their life cycle and get down to the ground. Do you guys remember what happened in 2021? It was a little hot and dry, wasn't it? Yeah, I think the wheat midge actually burned in the heads. So I was scouting my wheat midge in 2021. When we headed out, when it was about this tall, I was basically lying on the road trying to look for females in the crop. So I think we had a real non-disjunction between heading and also between, well, just the survival of these things in the heads. And so they didn't seem to get to the ground. So we're like, cool, not going to be a whole lot of wheat midge. I mean, I didn't say cool. I said, wow, what am I going to do? How can I study wheat midge when there aren't any? So I said, well, we'll put up the pheromone traps. We'll do 2022 again. We'll do Midge Busters 2.0, I called it. So here's the forecast for Alberta. Here's what had actually happened in Alberta. So just, you know, it doesn't make a lot of sense. There's the comparison to Saskatchewan too, big red areas. And then they didn't find any larvae in the ground on the provincial survey. So here's 2022. There's that big forecast for both provinces. This is what actually came out of the ground. So big red area again over here, and definitely some ugly or orange and yellow colors happening. So what's going on here? I'm really not 100% sure. So the forecast here did not pick up on the actual emergence that happened in the field. So if we didn't have midge busters going on, we would not have known that there were issues happening here. Remember I talked about the farmer who I said, you should go out in your field and scout. He was up here in the Peace River region. He went out and scouted and he said, I've got 3 adult midge on every single head. I said, okay, wow. He said, well, I'm just gonna hop on my sprayer and go. And I said, go count your female wheat midge first. It's in my protocol. And it'd be cool to know if they're actually in your field. And sure enough, they were. And so here's wheat midge up here, right? This is 0 midge. No infestation, and yet here he is with 3 females on his head. So this is a wake-up call to not turn your back on wheat midge. Here's our forecast for next year. So these red areas that we predicted are being realized in these areas here. And so this is the forecast. These are ones that were actually picked up in the ground. So in 2022, they made it to the ground and they're there. What happened over here? It's possible that, you know, that late peak that we saw in my fields there, maybe they're just deeper in the ground. And so it takes more moisture to get to them. So this is potentially something that the wheat midge can do to ensure that they don't all come out at once and have bad conditions. So as a population, they might have developed this coping strategy where some of them bury themselves deeper in the ground. And so that has been shown. It's a small percentage, but the percentage is there. So here's our forecast coming up on. So does it match up? Here's areas over here that are starting to match up. So I always make this joke because Manitoba doesn't have a soil coring program. I always say, hey, Manitoba, we just proved that you guys have wheat midge because no one's really been tracking it before. So I don't know. You guys didn't think that was too funny. Manitoba thinks it's too funny. But yeah, our best site for doing the wheat co-ops where we challenge wheat against wheat midge is actually Brandon, Manitoba. So they're definitely in Manitoba. So we're in that area there. So yeah, I've got some stuff going to Manitoba this year. So the future, I'd like to expand into some of those blank areas and just, it helps to have more data points. And then if you want to be a part of Midge Busters, there's my email address. You can just send me an email and I will send you the links to sign up. And we'll say thanks to listening about that. So I thought I better throw some stuff in about midge tolerant wheat as well. So this is that SM1 gene. So S stands for cytodichlosis. That's the genus name of the wheat midge. Moselana, that's the species name. And 1 means it's the first gene, and right now it's kind of the only gene. So there it is, cytodichlosis moselana. scientific name. So what the Winnipeg Center did, because they were a wheat research center, is they had a whole lot of wheat and they just challenged it against wheat midge constantly, challenge, and they found a winter wheat that the wheat midge larvae didn't survive on. And so it took a few years, but they crossed it into first variety called Unity VB. So if you see a VB, that stands for varietal blend. So that means it is 90% Unity that has the SM1 gene and 10% of something with the same milling qualities, heading date, etc., but just doesn't have that SM1 gene. And that's the refuge. And I'll show you why that's important in a second. So right now we've got 39 midge tolerant varieties in all different wheat classes now. So about maybe 2.5 years ago now was 10 years of stewardship success. So 10 years of this stuff being out there on the market. And so far we haven't seen big populations of virulent midge. That's midge that can survive on SM1. It does happen. Got some data from my field where they were doing that. And back when they did the calculations, they figured midge tolerant wheat gave you a bump of about $36 per acre. So in yield and grade benefits. So Todd from CCAN said that was done with some old math. So he used 80 bushels an acre and $8 a bushel at this 15% yield loss, which is at your 1 on 5 heads. And he said the actual saving is more like $96 an acre, just planting wheat with the SM1 gene. So the mode of action, those little first instars, they tap into the kernel as it's forming. And then this ferulic acid and P. Kumar also, but this is the one that they figure was doing most of the taste testing for them. They don't like the taste of these acids and they just stop feeding and they starve to death. So if you have really good eyes, really good microscope, you can find dead first instar larvae on there. So this is SM1 wheat represented by, I don't know, is that red or orange? Hard to tell on this screen. So these are midges that have come off of the SM1 wheat. These are the ones we call virulent midges. So you don't want a whole bunch of these being the only ones that survive in a field. So here's the refuge wheat. It doesn't have the SM1 gene. It produces females that will find these ones and mate because it's an interspersed refuge. That means it's just in the bag. So these are all over your field. There's no block of non-SM1 plants in the field. They're just everywhere. So they find each other and they mate, and because overcoming SM1 is a recessive trait, then they don't pass on the ability to overcome SM1. And so then we don't get a big population of virulent midge developing in the fields. So that's the idea behind the refuge. And so far it seems to be working. So what we're trying to work on is protecting that SM1 gene. So when I go back and I said, my research manager said, solve wheat midge. I said, well, don't we have the SM1 gene? I thought it was already solved, but we're trying to protect that SM1 gene. So we found a trait in winter wheat that I called egg antibiosis, because I thought it was killing the eggs, because all the data pointed to this wheat was killing the eggs, which has been found in other plants before. Insect lays an egg and they've got kind of a protein that uses, it's like a glue that glues the egg to the leaf surface. And some plants can realize that and they start attacking that egg with phytochemicals. So I thought this was happening in wheat. When we looked close at it, it wasn't actually happening. So I need a new name for this trait. But we've been looking at it and it seems to really synergize with SM1. And so future work is going to look at these two genes together and what does it do to the levels of acid in the seed. So it's probably just ramping up that SM1 response really fast. We're looking at mechanical resistance as well, putting hairs on the blooms, and also awns. So awns were shown to reduce wheat midge pressure a little bit. So we thought, okay, we put that out there, and our hairs in one class of wheat that we've got hairs on, it reduced the wheat midge pressure by about 1.2%. It doesn't seem like a lot. And then in the other class, it actually increased the wheat midge pressure. So that's always fun in research when you can't really prove that something that you're working on works. And then this one here does seem to work. This is called oviposition deterrence. And so what this actually is, we've figured out that the key to oviposition deterrence is the ratio of chemicals that makes up the smell of wheat is different on these oviposition deterrent ones. And there's just a few compounds that are a bit lower. And the wheat midge is kind of like, yeah, I don't really like that smell, so I'm not flying to that plant. So oviposition deterrence hasn't been tried on a grand scale before, but it has been tried just on small scale. And so you get a reduction in egg laying of about 25%, which is pretty good. So we've got a pyramid here showing how we're trying to protect SM1 as the sort of last line of defense, the big bit on the bottom of the pyramid there. Any questions about wheat midge before I jump into the rest of the
Does tillage have any effect on emergence?
That's a great question. So what tillage will do is it'll bring them up to the surface, and then things like ground beetles can eat them. So yeah, tillage does actually reduce wheat midge. So no-till has favored wheat midge populations. Would I suggest going back to tillage? Probably not, because we have other ways of dealing with wheat midge now than just tilling the crap out of them. So yeah, good question.
How far do they move?
The wheat midge are poor flyers, and so the best place to find wheat midge is in last year's wheat field, because they're just coming up and out of the ground there. But with a big wind, they can get caught in the wind and they can move in the wind as well. So that is a good question that I don't think anyone has really sat down and tried to figure out, because these things are a real problem to work with in the lab. Very small, and yeah, I'm having a lot of headaches with them in the lab. Question over there?
Farm safe seed.
Farm safe seed, yeah. So that's why I was showing kind of a truncated version of what's going on there. So if your refuge is getting torched by high levels of wheat midge pressure and you just keep saving seed, your refuge is going from 90-10 down to 95, down to like, 95, 2.5. Eventually you're gonna run out of refuge. So 95.5 is still okay for preventing virulent midge buildup. But if you just keep going with the farm safe seed and you're getting hammered by wheat midge, you might not even know it, right? Unless you get your field tested to know what your refuge is and you keep reblending to get that optimum ratio up. So that's why when you buy the VB varieties, you sign an agreement saying that you won't run it, you won't bin run seed past 2 years. So in that second year, you got to buy the stuff again. So hopefully the yield and grade benefits there are enough to keep doing that for you. Good question though. Yeah, Jay.
Now that we lost Lordstown, and we're hearing that later fusarium applications are actually better, as Aaron Kuchar was talking about earlier. How does the timing work for Saigon Legon? Because we won't kill the eggs, right? So by going at whatever 65 growth stage, are we too late to control wheat midge at that point?
Good question. That's why you need a pheromone trap in your field to know when emergence actually happens, to know when those wheat midge are coming out. Because maybe they're coming out at 65, maybe they're coming out at 59. You won't know that unless you have it out there. I'd say watch the AASC maps as well. I'll let you know in a year or two how accurate they're being when we can ground truth them all. So far, I've only got the 2 years of data on that. Yeah, good question.
Do expanded crop rotations help any, Tyler?
So do expanded crop rotations help? I'm not sure anyone's done that research, because that's big time, right? You need huge fields to do that in. But if you only have wheat on that field every 4 or 5 years, you're not putting the pressure back into that field. But next door, you could have a problem as well. So right, they will move around. It's not always just that field. Okay, great. Who wants to know about wheat stem sawfly? We don't have that in Saskatchewan, do we? Because we don't look for it. It's like a Manitoba conundrum there with wheat midge. So most of these slides I borrowed, all of these slides I borrowed because wheat stem sawfly is something that Brian Berries with Ag Canada works with, and Haley Catton as well out in Lethbridge, which is sort of wheat stem sawfly country. So Shelley Barkley with Alberta Ag took this awesome picture. That is a larva inside the stem. So it gets inside the stem and will trash all of the phloem tissue, so all the conducting tissue, and will lead to some shriveled seeds. That's not the biggest problem with those though. So opposite to wheat midge, this is a dry season pest. They like it hot and dry, whereas wheat midge like it cooler and wetter. So Brian has, these are very similar numbers to wheat midge though. So in a dry year, now you're worried about wheat stem sawfly, and you're not so worried about wheat midge. So this is what you're worried about, the clipping that those larvae do. So when you're a larva in a stem and you're gonna become a wasp, you gotta make sure that you can get out. So they actually chew a little notch in the stem. And then when a big wind comes along, and if you're in Lethbridge, that's a very, very windy place, your whole field can fall down if each stem had a wheat stem sawfly in it. So this is a native insect that hopped over from grasses when we started planting cereals all over the place. So it's native hosts then would have been some wild grasses. So it adapted to wheat, barley a little bit, but it never really is too economic in barley. And so it's been a pest for over 100 years now. So as long as we've had wheat cultivated on the prairies, we've had wheat stem sawfly as a pest. This is what the adults look like, right? It looks like a wasp. So a sawfly is in the same order as bees and wasps, but their waist is not thread waisted like your yellow jacket wasp. So they just kind of have a thick waist. And she is laying an egg into the stem. So that's where that larva is going to develop and eat the inside. And you can get shriveled seeds, just like with wheat midge. And so the economic threshold, you have to look back in time. You say 10 to 15% of the previous year's crop was cut. So take a look at what's in your field, and that's what the surveys will do, is we'll look at the percentage of cutting in that last year. So just recently, Owen's been working on this for a while, and he and Megan and their technician, Ross Wist, put out these climate models. So if the climate gets hotter and drier, as our government is predicting it will, then this is the wheat stem sawfly that we have right now. And it could just expand basically into almost all of the wheat growing region of Canada. So we might have more problems with sawfly in the future. So we do have a parasitoid that will attack them. This is Bracon cepi. So it's actually, it's cute, right? You think that guy's so cute? So very small. It's sitting on a coin there. It's Shelley Barkley's picture, of course. And another way that we can deal with it besides Bracon cepi, which like longer growing conditions. So these guys can have 2 generations. And so a long extended growing season allows them to get a second generation in and kill more of the wheat midge, or not wheat midge, sorry, wheat stem sawflies in the stem. Solid stem varieties are also good as well. So the adult female will lay eggs into the solid stem varieties, but they just don't really develop very well. They can't handle that solid stem. So, but expression is often dependent on the environment. So you might have a solid stem variety that doesn't really present with solid stem because it's affected by weather and agronomy. So these were the surveys from 2011, not looking too bad up until 2019. And you can see areas of wheat stem sawfly sort of moving around. Oh, it's just Alberta because we didn't have a Saskatchewan map before. But here we got 2018, 2019. Things are sort of building over time here. Here's the 2020 survey, and it was looking not very awesome for some of these areas down here for wheat stem sawfly. So this is percentage of stems cut. So here's that economic threshold right there, 10 to 25. So anything in this kind of ugly orange color is over threshold last year. And so you want to be watching out for this year, because as we saw in these maps right here, populations will just keep building with the right conditions. So hot and dry. Here's the 2021 survey. 2021, we've already established hot and dry. And yeah, just a big map there of badness starting to happen. So I got some quotes from Brian. He said 10 to 40% cut one year can easily be 75% the next year. So you're getting into really damaging levels of stem cutting. So, oh, this was a fun quote, actually. I took it out of Brian's paper. So they used to have a wheat stem sawfly survey. It started in 1926 and ran through to the 1940s. So I bet if we looked at those years, they were pretty hot and dry. Then the surveys resumed again in 2003 when wheat stem sawfly started to reach that outbreak status again. So when they start coming out and we start looking for them. So here's that 2022 survey. And good news, Sask Wheat is now funding a Saskatchewan wheat stem sawfly survey. So we'll be able to fill in this part of the map as of next year. So thank you very much. Sask Wheat for doing that, and they're working with the province on this. So if you are a producer and you would like someone to come to your field, look for wheat midge, wheat stem sawfly, you want to be part of the solution, point your phone at the screen and you can actually sign up. So I don't know if you know about the trespassing laws in Saskatchewan. I used to get really excited when I drive down a field and there'd be flowering canola and I'd say, oh, I want to hop in there with my sweep net. I'm not excited anymore because I can't do that. I can't just dip my net into people's fields anymore. We need permission in advance before we can do that. And actually I can't, the province can. I think they're going to try to bring us in on this. So if you point your phone at the screen there, you can sign up for Carter Peru and Dr. James Tansey's surveys and yeah, be a part of it. So there's phone numbers and stuff down there too. All good? You guys are all signed up? Thank you very much. And if not, you can look online too, you can find out. So grasshoppers, anybody know why we're talking about grasshoppers right now? We had a few of them. Right, grasshoppers, they like it hot and dry as well. So wheat stem, sawfly, and grasshoppers, they work really well under the hot, dry conditions. I had an amazing video that I tried to put in here for you yesterday. It wasn't a grasshopper feeding, but it was a praying mantis feeding on a grasshopper. And they have the same mouth parts and the same movement. So their orders are very similar. Chewing, they don't have a pupal phase. So they're young, look just like their old ones. So little praying mantis looks very cute. Big praying mantis, still cute, but very deadly. And so I wanted to show you how their mouth parts move. So same way that a praying mantis eats the head off of a grasshopper, is the same way that grasshopper eats the heads off of wheat or anything else in the field. So they're in the order Orthoptera. And in North America, we've got about 600 species of grasshopper, and there's actually 85 species in Saskatchewan. Yeah, so all of these slides came from Dr. James Tansey. He's put these together for the Ministry of Ag. So if you've got something that looks like a grasshopper, an adult grasshopper, it's got wings like this Carolina grasshopper, and it's before June, it is not a pest species. So here's a bush katydid. This is a Mormon cricket. These are huge. You're thinking that the world is ending if you ever see a Mormon cricket, because they're quite remarkable. I've only ever seen 2 in my life. I should put it in here instead of using the Flickr picture. And then this one, super annoying because they're those ones that go up and down in your dry field, making that clicking noise. Those are the males staking out their territory and trying to look impressive for females. But none of these are big pests, so they're not going to move into your crop and wipe it out. They might damage rangelands a little bit though, so I will qualify it with that. And so we call these ones either longhorn grasshoppers. See the long antennae on those guys? Banded wing grasshoppers. So they've got bands on their wings in the back. So don't worry about these guys. Don't try to control them. The pest species, they all overwinter as eggs. So here's clearwinged. This is pest number 1, and it's in a different genus than all of the other pests. But you will see adults from June to August. So this is an adult. How do you know? It's got fully formed wings. These ones are fairly small though, so they don't get very big. Not as big as the big 2 stripes. And so this is what you'll find in the early spring. That's an egg pod in the ground. And then they just get bigger and bigger as they go. These guys are going to be adults. So there's the full wings right there. These only have about half wings there. Or in wing pads that start to develop here and here. So if you want to know if you've got a clear winged grasshopper or not, look for this camouflage pattern on the wings right there. So that's kind of their giveaway. If you flip them over and you're happy with putting grasshoppers in your hand like I am, they actually have a spur right here. We're going to need to take some better pictures because Dan Johnson's Western Canada's grasshopper expert. This is an old picture that he took. And so if you flip them over right between their 2 legs, they've got a spur right here. So if it's got a spur, it's probably a pest species. So I'm not going to dwell on that spur because I can barely see it there. I don't expect you to see it either. We've got these migratory grasshoppers. So all of the next 3 are in the same genus, Melanopus. And these are distribution maps for them. So this one goes way up. And they're only about 2.3 to 2.8 centimeters in size. But at high densities, they can become gregarious. So they start to act like locusts when there's a lot of them. So that's where this migratory part comes in. So they'll pick up and leave together. So what are you looking for? If you want to identify a migratory grasshopper, look for these bands on the back legs here, basically. So these ones will feed on grasses and broadleaves. Sometimes you'll see that they've got a red hind leg here, so this is called the tibia on an insect. Sometimes they will be, but there's a few other ones that will have a red tibia as well, so it's not the greatest way to tell them apart. Then Packards is another melanopline, and they come out in the spring as well. They're a little bit bigger than lesser migratory, and they'll have these kind of two pale stripes here, but they're not extended all the way down like the two-striped grasshoppers. And then their real kicker is they got a blue tibia, and they're pretty much the only one that you'll find that's blue like that. So they say they prefer legumes, but they can get into small grain cereals and vegetables as well if they're hungry. This is the one that we have had outbreaks of. 2002, I was doing my master's degree, and these two stripes were so bad that they ate the marking tape off of the plants I was working on. And then we had this huge explosion of blister beetles and bee flies, which their larvae eat grasshopper eggs. And so the predators will help to keep the populations down when they're outbreaking a little bit. So the key on this one is you're looking for this black stripe on its back leg here. And then the two lines that run down the back, right from the head, all the way down to the bottom of the wings. There's one there, there's one on the other side. So that makes it a two-striped, and it is melanoplus as well. And these are the biggest ones that you'll find at 4 centimeters for an adult. So if you're scouting, this is always fun. When you're on the road side of your cereal field, here's how you scout. You actually take a big step and you try to count the grasshoppers that jump. So we've got a technician who's really good at that. But we do have 3 different classes to look for. Control not really required, maybe required, and usually required. So if it's 25 plus and you're like, I have no idea, I cannot count that, then you're probably in this category here. But 12 to 24, you should be able to tell apart from 0 to 12 and 25 plus. If you're inside the field, remember, your crop's not on the roadside. So actually go into the field, see if they're damaging the crop, first of all. And in the field, you're doing the same thing. I'm gonna take that big step. Do I have 0 to 6? So it's basically half what you've got on the roadside if you're in the field. Same with maybe required, and same with control usually required. So look at it. Are they feeding on your crop? Are they making damage? Are they actually in your crop, or are they just hanging out on the roadside? Sometimes grasshoppers will just move through and sit on everything, and they won't actually eat anything. So have a look at it and see what's going on there. And here's our forecast. So a lot of grasshoppers last year, and a good long, nice fall for them to lay eggs in means that pressure is likely going to be strong in 2023 again. So stoplight colors again, looking pretty high for a lot of the parts of the province here. So last year up here, we actually have a 5th problem insect. It's a melanopline as well, but it has a 2-year life cycle. So we only get adults every 2 years. Last year we had adults, and so I think they're not predicting a whole lot up there. So the video that I had was actually a Bruner's grasshopper getting eaten by a praying mantis. So maybe I'll try to put that out on Instagram for you, so you guys can still see it. So thanks to everyone who dissects wheat for me, everyone I've been working with up here, all my collaborators, and then all of the money people who make me and my program possible. So thanks definitely to Sask Wheat. Lana's got her hand up already.
Yeah, so we had lots of grasshoppers, but we also had lots of crickets, and you can tell the cricket, I think the crickets were going for the grasshopper eggs.
Yeah.
So, and our area is really not very high on that map, considering how many grasshoppers we were seeing on the field. It was quite moist. So like those are based on actual fall sampling for what's live eggs, right? So
That's
after-
actually based on adults, I think. I
Is it
made the
based on
mistake
adults?
before. I got corrected
Okay.
by the
That's
lab
what I
next
wanted
door.
to
Yeah,
No, so that's based on actual adults that were there in the fall.
yeah,
So we don't know how many eggs will survive the spring between the cold and the crickets and the whatever else, mold or whatever else. we have.
yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of fungal diseases. So grasshoppers don't do well when it's wet. So if we have a wet spring, that'll keep the grasshopper populations low because the fungal pressure goes up really high on them. Yeah, good question. Crickets eat grasshopper eggs. But I kept saying that crickets are beneficial, and then people kept showing me pictures of crickets eating their canola, just making me eat my words because they were damaging canola. Yeah,
So this last summer, down actually south of town here, I walked in a field, and saw canola, and the grasshoppers were just sitting on the canola, and they looked just lethargic, dead, and it was all over the place, south.
so when you poke them, did they move?
Not really, and then they would just fall off.
Hmm.
Dying, too much rain, disease for them.
So what you're probably seeing is a disease called entomophora. And entomophora gets going under those wet conditions. So it's soil borne. So you get the rain, blasts it up out of the ground, covers the grasshoppers, and it makes the grasshoppers think that they're overeating. And so they crawl up onto the top of things like weed heads or canola, like you were seeing, and they just grab on for dear life and they die. And they just sit there dead, and then they become like a fungal spore dropping factory, and they just keep spreading spores to brothers and sisters who are in the field. So we see that quite a bit. We
I saw
actually
that,
started
yeah.
seeing that in
Now we
flowers
ran
too.
around this last year.
Yeah,
Figured
so
out
that's one of the big things that keeps those populations going.
Same thing, yeah,
So
so
same
they're,
thing.
You just brown and.
yeah, they didn't look good.
Brown and wrinkled.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I was happy the grasshoppers were dying, because we had a
Yeah.
hell of a year with them, so.
Yeah, there are some diseases out there that can keep those levels. Like, yeah, you get an outbreak and then they all get sick and they just die. So you might get the damage that year, but it helps to bring those populations.
Hopefully we have a better year next year.
I hope so too. And those spores should still be in the ground, waiting around for them next year. Yeah, great question. So you can find that in any of my pictures on Twitter. I think I probably have a lot of those. Yeah, Jake.
So I was kind of confused about last year because it was a really, really wet spring. Like, we had a hard time getting the crop in, but yet we had grasshoppers like crazy.
Ah.
So how
Yeah,
much rain does it take, I guess?
yeah, that is a really big question. Yeah, what happened? Maybe there wasn't enough. These guys could have not actually have come out by then, right? So they don't come out right in the spring, they come out when your crop is coming out. So if things had dried up a bit, then it wouldn't have been too wet for them. I'm grasping at straws, but that could be it.
Yeah, it was a hell of a year for them, and even though it was raining, they just kept coming.
Mhm.
So there was a lot of vegetative growth for them to eat. That might have had something to do with it too, because we had a decent crop in this area, but grasshoppers were coming hot.
Yeah.
A lot of silence went on, hoping we get it back this year.
No, I think it was indicative of the population the year before. Tremendous populations that we were just blessed with good moisture down in this area.
Yeah,
Because I know my organic roast is loaded with dead grasshoppers.
okay,
You know,
nice.
they're just hanging on. Last summer was the first time I saw bee flies since the 1980s.
Yeah. When I was spraying mosquitoes, we had yellow vests and they had bee flies landing on me trying to drink nectar from it. They thought it was a flower. And so that was back in 2001, 2002 during that last big outbreak. So, yeah. So I like your question. It's sort of like, it could have been worse. So maybe if we didn't have the wet seasons, it would have been even worse than it actually was. We don't know what percentage of the population was killed by the wetness. Yeah, lots of things. These are big questions. We need to keep, these surveys. If we can keep doing the surveys and we keep funneling things in, then we can look at those big environmental questions as well. Because that's like a 20, 30 years data type question.
There's an SFP project, with USAS.
Oh, yeah.
May or may not get approved at Perdia, but we've got a site at Redbirds, we're supposed to do something to grasshoppers here. I figured since we've got this, probably a population that pop up in the spring, we might as well try to have some of it.
Yeah, do you know what it's about? Is it
I forget, but it involves some pesticide spraying.
okay?
and I forget what else.
So Lana's mentioning SFP, those are like the province will fund sort of demonstration projects. Yeah, I have two that I'm trying to write up, SFPs, not with grasshoppers though.
But it would be, fancy this.
Yeah. Okay, probably done, huh? You're done. I'm done. Other questions done? All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening. I appreciate it.